So I have this question here from Blessing. And Blessing is asking a question based on a podcast I did a while back, which is talking about youthful strength. And here I kind of broke down our lives into pretty much four stages. So where you have the early stage of life from 0 till like 19, 18, 19, where I think people are meant to play. And I talked about the brain being in such a way where it's not fully formed and doesn't think of consequences. So you can tell by that the structure of the brain being one that is not very concerned with consequences is one that it's highly drawn to excitement, tells us what we should do. And that tells us that as human beings, between those years of 0 and 19, you should be engaged in play. And what I mean by play is a sense of adventure, trying out things and just enjoying what you do. And then I went on to talk about the second stage, which is the youthful stage of life. And this is from 20 to, I would say, about 39 or 40, where your brain is fully formed. The frontal cortex of your brain is fully formed. And it's a time that you're meant to really get out there and ask questions and lead, because the brain is at its peak at that point when it comes to learning, when it comes to trying out new ways of doing things, when it comes to questioning things. The brain is at the strongest. That is the peak of man's intellectual strength. And that's when people should be leaders, where they are open to hear advice, to take advice. They are willing to compare ideas, and they are not rigid. So I talked about that as the second phase of life. And I talked about this third stage, which is from 40 to what I would say maybe about 60. About 60, which a lot of people see as retirement years. But then I believe that that age is the age where between 40 and 60, where we ought to start teaching and sharing our knowledge. And this is the point where your brain begins to shrink. It begins to shrink by a particular percentage every decade by about 5%. And what this means is if you don't share it, you would lose it. And so we need to, if you're a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old, you should do a lot of mentoring, a lot of coaching, a lot of advising. Very important. The 40-year-old, the 50-year-old, the 60-year-old are meant to write about their experiences, talk about their experiences, write books, create courses, and things that the 20-year-old and the 30-year-old can use as a guide while leading. And then when you get to your 70s and above, I believe this is a time to rest. It's a time of rest. It's a time for you to really, number one, you're meant to curtail and restrict some of your activities, not engage in too many activities. It's a time for you to rest. Um, and that's why you realize that even at that time is the point where the brain really begins to what we call decline very fast. So they have a lot of short-term memories. Um, a 40-year-old, a 70-year-old isn't meant to be someone that is meant to hold on to to grudges for so long. You understand? It's going to be adversely affect you if you're a 70-year-old that is thinking of what someone did to you um 40, 30 years ago. I don't think it's even a good lifestyle for anyone to hold on to grudges. But then at that very age, it's a terrible thing for a 70-year-old to have. A 70-year-old should be at rest. You understand? Restricted activities in terms of not too many things that ought to be done. Your demands on your time should not be very heavy. Your time should be as flexible as possible. It should be a time where you prioritize rest, and you have a smaller circle of people that you deal with. I remember this. They just had the American elections, and the time of Joe Biden's administration was a huge contrast to Obama's administration, and you could tell that age really played a part. You see him going out for meetings and sleeping off. There's no way he could keep up with the rigorous schedule of running a country as powerful as the USA. The same thing with Trump at the moment. He's 78 years old. He's in pretty good shape, but you really cannot compare him to a 40-year-old or a 30-year-old. I think it's going to have very, very huge demands on him that he wouldn't be able to cope with, not because he has any um, um, bad intentions, but you cannot. It's just very hard to do things at that very age. It's very hard for you to be flexible in working. It's very hard for you to keep up with late hours. It's very hard for you sometimes to even keep up with appointments, for your memory to work that well in that age. It's a time to retreat. It's a time for rest, to prioritize rest. And so Blessing asked this question, and I'm going to take some time to answer Blessing's question on that podcast. Blessing says, how can individuals retain memory, skills, and expertise as they age, particularly after 70, when cognitive decline often occurs? Are there effective strategies for maintaining knowledge retention despite aging? That's the first question. The second question Blessing is asking is, what methods can individuals in their 20s and 30s employ to acquire broad knowledge and develop intellectual depth, enabling them to cultivate a well-rounded understanding of various subjects and disciplines? Now, this is a very good question, and I will try my best to answer these two questions. So, with the first question, as it pertains to how an individual can retain memory, skills, and expertise as they age, particularly after 70, when there's some kind of decline in your cognitive abilities, what can you do? Now, I think something has to be said here as a basis for everything I'm going to say. I think when you understand this very thing I'm about to say, and we take it as not an option, and we don't see ourselves as an exception to it, but something that will happen to every single one of us, I think we will be more objective in our views of every stage in life. And what I want to say is the body was made to decline with time. I'll say that again. The body was made to decline with time. Don't get it twisted. The body was made to decline with time. It is not a curse. It is not a curse. It was intended for the body to work that way. The body was designed to age and to decline with time. So we must build everything around this, because I find a lot of people talk about how to evade this decline. And a lot of times when we do that, we are going against nature. And a lot of times when we go against nature, we always lose. Nobody goes against nature and wins. Nature always wins. And we were designed by nature to decline in form as we age. Very important for us to get that at the back of our minds. Very important. You see, I really believe that people like Charles Darwin did a lot to confuse the world and to bring us to this place where we are not accepting of the design of nature. So I think a lot of Charles Darwin's thoughts and position on evolution has done more damage to us as human beings to reject the true cause of nature, and to accept the fact that there is a designer behind nature. I think anybody that goes with the concept of evolution, that there is no designer, things just happen randomly, would really have a very, very hard time living in the world. You're going to question a lot of things. You are going to blame yourselves for a lot of things, and you are going to live a very sad life. I think it puts life in perspective when we understand that there is a designer that designed a function and that designed a process of life and nature. Once you have that at the back of your mind, once you accept this fact, you've accepted peace in your life. It's the first step towards peace and happiness in life. That is the designer. And God is that designer. Everything was intended for a function and to follow a particular dynamics and process. So there's dynamics to everything in life. And one of the major dynamics about life is that we were designed to decline with time. We're designed to decline with time. Now, are there things that people can do to aid a smooth decline? Not to stop it, not to reverse it. Remember, saying they can reverse it. It is not true. And if it seems true for now, give it a little bit of time and you'll see the repercussions. You cannot stop it. You cannot reverse it. Some people feel you can slow it down, and I think that's plausible. But you can make it smooth. That's possible. And that's why when it comes to diet, eating well, exercising well, those things are good. Activities like reading can help to keep your brain sharp. But don't get it twisted. Your brain will never be as sharp. A 70-year-old brain will never be as sharp as a 20-year-old brain. Both reading books, never. A 70-year-old will never have more energy than a 20-year-old who also pays attention to his exercising and his diet. Never. Do you understand? Never. It's just that the 70-year-old might be a fit 70-year-old compared to another 70-year-old, but never compared to a 20, 30, even a 40-year-old. Do you understand? So we must get that out of the way. We were designed to decline in terms of some of our major functionalities, both external and internal functionalities. So cognitive power will always decline. It will. It will always decline. That is not a cause. And immediately we begin to accept these things as not God being wicked, not nature being unfair, but accept it as a process by a designer who knows what is best and what works best. You see, working as a designer, one of the frustrations I had when I worked as a designer was the frustration of some clients just telling me, why doesn't my logo look like this other person's logo? So you have somebody in the food industry complaining that their logo doesn't look like the logo I designed for someone in the fashion industry. You have someone in entertainment complaining that their logo doesn't look like someone in the education industry. You have someone who caters to young children, infants, complaining that their identity, their visual identity doesn't look anything like someone that is catering, or a company, an organization that caters to young people in their 20s or in their 30s. I always used to meet people say, why doesn't it look like the Nike logo? And I'm like, you're not in the same industry. You're not, and some people are, why is my logo so boring? I'm like, it looks boring because you're doing a very serious business. You're in financial consulting. People are giving you money. They must know that you are serious about your business and you're capable of doing it. That's why we are using something very simple, very straight to the point that might look boring to you. This comparison of people that are not in your class has always been a burden for us. And that's why you must learn to trust the designer. And that's why when I was working as a designer, it was very frustrating when clients did not trust me and the knowledge I had in creating things for a particular function. So I just want us to put this to rest, that the aim is not to go against decline when you are in your 70s. Your body will do what your body will do. And sometimes, even in spite of good diet and exercising and activities like reading, you still see that there is decline. And you even realize that somebody that doesn't even have good diet, still eats junk food at 70 and stuff, ends up being more agile than someone who does. Sometimes life just turns out that way. But the truth of the matter is that we were designed by God to decline as we age because we must exit the world. Everything must exit the world. So I see a lot of people, especially in the faith arena, especially within the Christian faith, find it very hard to accept some concepts as concepts of nature. And this is where I want to talk about something I would like to term as functional frailties. God is in the business of designing functional frailties. And this is what it means. It means that some things, simply put, were designed to fail with time, to get weaker with time. We must stop seeing this as a bad thing, but we must start seeing it as a process of life. So instead of resisting it, instead of binding it, instead of thinking how to maneuver your way around it, we must come to accept it. That these frailties were designed by the designer himself to make it frail with time. And that's what I call functional frailties. The fact that it's failing shows that it's functional. But the human being doesn't want to accept that things fail in life. Things fail. We even hate to accept the fact that God designed for some things to fail. But we must come to that point. The moment we begin to embrace this, the moment we begin to embrace life, and the moment we begin to live life more intentionally than fictionally. A lot of people have fictional expectations of life, especially within the religious community. So you see a lot of Christians say, they cite places in the Bible and say, okay, Caleb, there's a character in the Bible called Caleb. And one thing that makes him stand out in the Bible was a part of the Bible where he had turned 80 or 85. And he was still saying he was as strong as he was when he was in his 40s. So I see a lot of people stand on this. They're like, if Caleb was as strong in his 80s as he was in his 40s, then so should I. So there's a covetous attitude towards some things we see in the Bible. And this is what I would like to term as anomalous achievement. Anomalous achievement. So they're anomalies, but they're achieved. It shouldn't be so. The designer on a good day doesn't design to be so, but there's one anomaly that the designer allows to be like that. I see a lot of people that become very entitled to anomalous achievement. So they read the Bible and they feel this should be me, it should happen to me like this too. At 85, I should be as strong as I was in my 40s. So they refuse to accept the functional frailty that when they're 85, they're not as strong. So they see that as a bad thing. They evade or reject functional frailties and become entitled to anomalous achievements. Caleb, being as strong as he was at 85, was an anomaly. It was more or less a miracle. To be just as strong as you were 40 years ago is an anomaly. It was a miracle. He didn't achieve this by any form of exercise he did, any routine, anything he ate. It was a gift from God. God gifted him with this exemption from what seemed to be a functional frailty. He decided to exempt him from it. Designer decided, okay, you know what? When it comes to the case of this person, I will suspend this functional frailty. And so it was still as strong. And why was it still as strong? because he had an assignment to do that needed strength. Very important for us to note before we start claiming things in the Bible and thinking that anomalies should be normal. Before thinking that anomalous achievements should replace our functional frailties. The question is, do you know what your assignment is? What the designer designed for you to do? And does that need for the designer, what that thing you're meant to do, does it create a need for the designer to exempt you from a functional frailty? I believe Caleb needed his strength because there was a battle he wanted to fight 40 years ago, but the time wasn't right. The battle had his name written on it. So even when he waited 40 until he fought that battle, his strength could not decline. His strength could not decline. So it's not something everybody claims without knowing what your assignment is. If it's something that determines for you to be as agile as a 40-year-old, if it does, then you would be. If it doesn't, then embrace your functional frailty or embrace sadness and disappointment. A non-willingness to embrace our functional frailty only leads to sadness and disappointment. So you see people that try to talk about looking youthful, doing cosmetic surgery so that they don't have wrinkles. The body was made to wrinkle with time, to lose firmness, for things to sag and for things to droop. Functional frailties. You must embrace it because in that functional frailty is true beauty. Some of you will have short-term cognition, short-term memory. You might not remember things as much, but then you must remember that the body was designed to fail with age. Some of you will still have minds as sharp as possible because your assignment determines what functionalities you have. But those things will be anomalies. Another thing I see people do is when childbirth, especially within the Christian faith, you see a lot of women saying they do not want to experience the pain of childbirth because they read the Bible and the place where the Egyptian people, I've forgotten what's the name of the people that deliver children, when they were given the assignment to deliver this Israelite children, and Pharaoh had given out a law then that every child born by an Israelite should be killed. So when they went and they tried to deliver this Israelite children and kill them, they realized that the Israelite had already given birth to them. And so they went back to Pharaoh and they told Pharaoh, I can't remember the word for those ladies that used to, midwives. When the midwives went back to Pharaoh, they told Pharaoh that, look, these ladies, they just give birth like it's easy. No labor. No labor is so easy for them. And I see a lot of people stand on that their birth would be easy too. Not understanding that the labor of pregnancy is a functional frailty. That we feel pain is a functional frailty. It is not a curse. It's not a curse. It is not. The reason why you had this anomalous achievement was because the Israelites were in a period where they were under threat and they couldn't afford to be screaming while giving birth to children. While giving birth to children. So even the part of the Bible that says the midwives lied to Pharaoh, but let's assume they didn't lie, that it was actually even like that they gave birth to children without making a sound. It is now becomes ridiculous for somebody to think that they will become that anomaly, and that anomaly will be a normal function for them. The designer did not design for you to give birth without some strain, without some pain, without some pushing. It might happen sometimes, but most times it doesn't happen like that. Most times it doesn't. We shouldn't think this is a reflection of our weak faith. We shouldn't. Early this year, my dog had some puppies, and I saw it, when it was about to go into labor. It was so distressed. This was a dog, so distressed. It was so distressed, pacing. And I knew the labor was about to happen. And I saw it trying to get its puppy out of it. And I said, this is almost no different from the women. This labor is a function of the designer. It's a function of the designer. The designer designed it to be like that. The designer also designed menopause for a woman. When you get to 70, your body, or a particular, I think from 60 or so, I'm not even sure what the age for menopause is, but there's a time when a woman cannot conceive anymore. The designer designed this not out of wickedness, but out of love. Because he realized that if this woman conceives, she cannot produce milk anymore. She cannot stay late nights and be sleep deprived like a 20 or a 30-year-old anymore. She can't do those things. So the baby would suffer. So he had to put in a functional frailty there, that when you get to a particular age, you cannot give birth. Now, we do know when we read the Bible, there are anomalies there, where we read about Sarah who gave birth, into her 80s and 90s. She gave birth. But then we must understand that there was an assignment for Sarah to deliver an Isaac. Do you have such an assignment? A lot of these things that we claim we want to have comes from covetousness. We do not have a reason and a why we want it. We just want it because. Just because. But the designer is too intentional to let us have things just because. So with your question, Blessing, what can a 70-year-old do? I think what a 70-year-old can do is try to know what his assignment is at that point in his life before trying to resist cognitive decline, which is meant to happen. It's a functional frailty. Know what your assignment is before starting to think, it takes me a while to get out of bed. I want to be able to jump out of bed. Does your assignment have to do with your level of vitality? For those who are meant to write more books in their 70s, the designer would let you write more books in your 70s. Your hands will not fail you. Your mind will not fail you. For those who are meant to speak in their 70s, the designer will give you the ability to speak in your 70s. Your speech will not fail you. For those who are meant to do gardening in their 70s, your back will not fail you. The most important thing is to know what your assignment is. That assignment that gives you the privilege of an anomalous achievement. But stop being covetous of someone else's own. With your second question, what can a 20 to 30-year-old do to acquire broad knowledge and develop intellectual depth? Now, as I said, that when you're in your 20s and your 30s, your brain is at its strongest. Your brain is at its peak. The truth of the matter is, just like you do not walk to be frail as a 70-year-old, you do not walk to be strong as a 20-year-old. You are naturally strong. But it's funny how a lot of 20-year-olds now choose frailty. They choose frailty. And they choose frailty because as a 20, 30-year-old, they already believe that life should be easy. So you see people wanting to retire at 30, at 40. Is a faulty mentality. That is somebody in their 20s choosing frailty over strength, going against nature. They want the easiest job, the job that determines for you not to go out. They choose a life of isolation over one of socialization. When your brain is looking for information, you choose to be isolated. And this is the problem I have with the Western world that tries to isolate us rather than socialize us. It's in socialization that we get exposure and learn. So I see 20-year-olds live a reclusive life. They don't go out, they don't interact. They don't talk to people, they don't have conversation. They become more antisocial. You can never build intellect by being antisocial. 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds stuck in their rooms gaming. 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds stuck in club or betting houses, not meeting anybody. 20-year-olds stuck on social media consuming content that doesn't help them. I think what we need to do when you're in our 20s or our 30s is to allow ourselves to experience life some more. Is to go out some more and meet with people and strike up conversations. It's not even about schooling. It's about interest. It's a time when you are meant to ask questions. You have questions in your mind, ask questions. That's one of the reasons why I set up the Telegram Q&A platform. If you're not part of it, I will advise you to join it and invite people to join it. I love getting questions from 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. I believe they ask the most interesting questions. But you must allow yourself to ask, to question. A 20, 30-year-old must not choose rigidity over flexibility. You must be willing to abandon old ways of doing things to adopt new ways. By all means, do not seek retirement in your 20s or your 30s. It is not an achievement. It is a curse. It's a curse because it's anti-nature. It's anti-nature. When a 20, 30-year-old chooses a life of retirement, he would harvest depression and sadness. You will be sad and you will be depressed by nature. I once read an article about the guy that founded, I can't remember the game, I think it was Roblox. It's either Roblox or Minecraft. I think it's Roblox. One of those very popular multiplayer games. And the game got acquired by Microsoft for billions of dollars. And this man went into his retirement, I think in his 30s. Went into his retirement. And I was reading this article where he was talking about how depressed he got. He was thinking, I started this thing so I can retire early, but then now that I'm retired early, I'm losing everything. Everything started falling apart in his life. His wife left him. His friends left him. He found himself alone in exotic places with no company. Started contemplating suicide. Because no one is meant to retire in their 20s and 30s. You are meant to move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Stop listening to what these influencers tell you. That's not life. Nobody's meant to retire in their 20s and 30s. You're never meant to stop working in your 20s and 30s. Never meant to stop learning in your 20s and 30s. That's what your brain wants to do. Your anatomy tells you differently. It tells you are ready for activity, intellectual stimulation, conversations, relationships. That's what your designer designed you for at that time. It's anomalous for a young person who is within their 20s and their 30s to reject work and reject learning and reject leadership. I think that's very important to note. To be scared of leadership. You should jump into leadership and make mistakes. And don't judge yourself too hardly for mistakes. When 20s and 30s seek perfection, it is anomalous because we never learn in perfection. We learn with mistakes. So embrace mistakes at this point in your life. So I hope this answers your question. Blessing. 70 a 70-year-old must be more embracing of his functional frailties. Be more embracing of it. It's not a curse. The designer was intentional about that. A 20-year-old should not look at the rest of a 70-year-old and want to have it in his 20s or his 30s. No. You should choose to build more relationships at that age. And again, I would end this by just saying that thing that the human being was made to decline with age. Don't reject it. Medicine might tell you they have the pill to reverse it, but then I'll tell you it will come with consequences because you can never kick against nature and win in the end.